Hey, welcome everybody to the What Sold podcast, the first ever edition of the What Sold podcast with my friend Matt Brock, who is the king of the What Sold world. You might know him as Rusty the Reseller. He has many different nom de plumes and aliases, but all of them are the same madman in this. So, Matt, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. Oh
Yeah,
man, I'm really happy to be here making
yeah,
this happen.
this is exciting. I know you've been doing a lot of things on the YouTubes and other places, but today we're
Hmm.
actually officially launching the very first. I don't want to call it the Matt Brock podcast because it really has a lot of things, but it really is the Matt Brock
Mm-mm.
podcast. And we're
Well,
going to be talking about what sold on this thing. Now, you already have
yeah,
a channel on YouTube called What Sold. Can you describe that a little bit?
I do. Absolutely. Yeah. It's basically just how it sounds. All we do is we talk about things that were purchased with the intention of reselling. We put them on a platform, usually eBay, but it could be other things. We sell them. And then the show is really about displaying those. Oftentimes, we're just showing the actual eBay store. So this isn't hey, I got this thing and I sold it, made tons of money, but you're not really seeing it. And I mean, this is very transparent. Look at my eBay store. This is the picture of the item. This is what it sold for. We tell you what we paid for it, how long we've had it, whether we were happy with the sale or not, and any
Oh,
information we want to give,
oh,
then we can. I mean, yeah, sometimes I'm like, guys, I'm gonna be honest, I'm really disappointed in this one. But usually it's really more about, hey, these are things you can find in your community. Maybe you have it at home, or it's at your parents' house, that kind of thing. Really about education and hopefully inspiring or just letting people know that this isn't a magical world. This is something that anybody can really do. It takes a lot of steps to do it full time and make a living out of it for sure. But you have to start somewhere. And there's a lot of people who do it part time out there, and they enjoy that. And it's great to have a little extra money. But that's what the show's about in a nutshell.
oh, that's awesome. Hey, move your mic over a little bit, kind of.
Closer?
Yeah, like kind of in front of your. Let's see where it is. It sounds pretty good. I just want to confirm that.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
that's perfect. That's perfect. Um,
Great.
so the idea of the show, or the idea of what you're doing, really is creating a kind of almost like a secondary market, right? We all know, Amazon and all the other sort of commercial websites out there that buy and sell stuff. eBay obviously is a big one that people sell
Yep.
stuff on, and people have had varying levels of engagement with eBay. But your site is almost like a third tier, if I can use that. It's sort of saying I'm not selling as a platform, but I'm finding things out there. For instance, all of us, I have things where I'm looking at things. I have a watch, pretty nice high end sports watch that I need to sell. I'm like, ooh, I need to sell
Ooh.
that. So you you don't specialize in any one thing though when you sell, right? You kind of just decide what it is. If you think it has value, you purchase it, or someone gives it to you, however way you do it, and then you sell it.
I don't have specialties necessarily. In the beginning, I started this type of work really out of necessity. And so in the beginning, as you can imagine, it was all about what can I make a dollar on? Anything I can find that I think I can
Yeah.
make money on, that's how I do it. But as I learned, as I went through things, I married my own personal interests with what made sense for the business. And I've become somewhat of a specialist on certain categories of things, um, based off of my experience with it, how well they sell, how
Hmm.
easy they are to acquire, and what I personally I really like artwork. I really like instruments. I started selling on eBay in like 2000, 2001,
Wow.
and just part-time, just not even part-time, just like sort of from home. I'd find an instrument, I'd buy it, I'd play it for 3 months, I'd sell it for $100. Hey, that was a great experience. I learned about an instrument, in the process. But I've developed some knowledge more in some fields than others, and now I target those because I'm getting better at finding them, paying less for them. And the longer my store goes on, the more people follow it and the more likely I am to sell it, if that makes sense.
Okay, so that's a good segue to start talking about. This is our first ever show, and I can imagine people that have followed you or listening in on this, or like me, when I was like, wait, you do what? your job is
Hmm.
what? And one of the reasons why we decided to do this podcast is because it was just such a fascinating story. So let's back up a little bit. Let's rewind the tape.
Yeah.
Back up, maybe not to 2000, but to the point where you decided, hey, I'm going to make this a job. And now, not
Hmm.
everybody that's listening is going to be doing this as a job, but let's just imagine, let's take your story, Matt's story about how you got to become Rusty the Reseller and how you sort of launched into this. So give us a background on how
Yeah.
you got here.
Well, it's my third career,
Oh,
and who knows what the future holds, but
yeah.
I mean, I didn't even start this as a, hey, I want to build, an empire of sorts. It was more, uh, I'm in a tough situation and I got two young children and a family to help provide for. And how do
Mm.
I go about doing that in such a weird time as the COVID era 2020 was?
Ah.
But my background is in mental health. I got a master's in rehabilitation counseling, and I was a mental health therapist for a dozen years. And that's really working with people, serving people with disabilities, serving individuals with mental illnesses was my focus, and that's my educational background. And I sort of moved out of that. I'm sorry to say it's still a great field and very very needed today, even still. Um, but it was difficult with the agency's hiring, and I made less my last year annually than I made after 12 years of doing it than I made my first year out of graduate school, if you can believe that.
Oh,
And
wow.
all the while, costs are going up. You have a family, inflation, and I just said, it's good work. I just can't afford to do it anymore. And so I moved in, I sort of at that same time. A person I knew, a friend of mine, had started up a business in the kind of during the craft beer boom. He started a tech-based restaurant bar concept. And because I knew him and it was small, he wanted to scale it, grow it. And so I went to work with him and we did that for several years, built this thing out, um, got a bunch of people involved. It was operating in multiple states. It was a multi-million dollar grossing company by the time that it dropped off. And that brings us to 2020.
Mm-hmm.
The health crisis, people are staying home, and the kind of the job sort of ceased to be able to operate both the stores that were existing, and also nobody's wanting to open up new stores in that time. So I found myself very quickly at home with two small children, and we're a dual earning income family. So how do I continue to work? How do I provide for my family, both, tangibly in the moment, but also find time to do work? I was already buying and selling on eBay,
Well, wait,
very, very
before you get to the
part-time.
buying and selling part, and we'll get to that,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
let's talk about, I mean, so I think for a lot of people who are listening can relate with COVID. So COVID
Yeah,
hits.
absolutely.
I became a full-time podcaster during that time because I was a teacher and all the schools shut down. I
Right.
was like, well, I don't want to,
Yep.
you know, I'm going to make something happen. So it is interesting that in some really ironic ways, COVID launched a lot of careers because you had to do
Absolutely.
something. And so you're at
Ended
home.
a lot and started a lot. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So here you are at home. You've already been sort of dabbling in the buying and selling world, buying instruments, right? You're buying guitars and different
Yes.
things. You are a talented guitar player. You won't admit it, but you are. And you like instruments and you play. The intro to this show is one and only Matt Brock playing a guitar. So it's really fun that you
Hmm.
do that. So you
Hmm.
had this thing that you liked, and you said, well, I've got to do something. So let's go from there. You got to do something. How do we get from there
Yep.
to Rusty to reseller?
Yeah. I just looked around and thought, what is the easiest point of entry to earn income? So the parameters are no one's hiring. So traditional jobs are out. At
Mm-hmm.
least, at the time, I had no idea how long, right? It was a scary time. I have to be present because I'm taking care of my kids while they're at home from school and until they're back. I already had experience with using the eBay platform. I already understood the idea of buying things and selling them for more than I paid for them. That's a
Mm-hmm.
simple concept foundationally. And I had a computer at home and I had some space to store things. So I decided the easiest way to get into it is to use something I already know. I don't have to, start something new or learn a whole new trade. I just expand on what I already knew, which was very little at the time, but
Right.
enough, right? Enough to get started.
Sure.
So that was it. I would watch my kids. Um, whenever I did some sourcing online to begin with, because again, you can do that from the comfort and safety of your own home. And when they would come in, I would do what I needed to do to try to photograph or repair those items, put them back on a platform and sell them.
So
And
this was a learning on
that's
the job situation going on because it wasn't like you knew how to do
100%.
stuff. You just
Yes,
kind of
yes,
learned it as you went.
100%.
Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I failed many times and I still mess up and make bad decisions, bite off more than I can chew. There are a lot of things and a lot of the things I encounter are not new to anyone who runs their own business, started their own thing. Um, this is not unique to me, right? Maybe a little bit more unique in the specific thing that I'm doing, but the difficulties and challenges that I face on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis are the same challenges that anyone who has a retail store, anybody who sells a good and probably even services. It's the same. There are cyclical times of year when things are better or worse. You've got to budget. You have to know how much to save, how much, what's your cash flow like.
Hmm.
Here's a great opportunity, but I don't have the money. Should I stretch it? Should I not? Like there's so many um, tiny little things that you have to work out. And people ask me on the channel all the time, the Rusty channel, the What Sold channel, "Well, how do you know when to buy this? Or how do you know?" And I think it's kind of them to ask as if I'm an authority on it. I have opinions, but I'm
But you
certainly not
are
an
more of an
authority. And
authority than
also,
most people that are doing it.
I suppose, no, that is absolutely true, but there isn't necessarily a specific answer to every question. Sometimes, and they don't
Correct.
like this, but sometimes the right answer is different for you than it is for me
Hmm.
because we're in different places with different circumstances. I just try on the channel to give general information that I think can guide people in the right direction, and maybe they can learn from things I tell them as opposed to having to make the mistakes I made, when I
Right.
was figuring it out on my own.
Well, and the
I also
basis of the
watched a lot
show,
of YouTube videos
yeah, isn't that
to begin with. Yeah,
YouTube
I mean
University's been amazing.
that's yeah, 100%.
So we're going to take basically two trains of thought on this show. One is actually talking about the physical things that we sell. The other part
Hmm.
is just sort of answering what you're saying now. So let the Rusty, the reseller, and the What Sold YouTube channel. So you go
Yep.
in it, COVID's there, you decide, well, I'm just going to record myself. Now, for those of you that do not know what Rusty the Reseller is and have no idea what we're talking about right now, Matt has an alter ego and his name is Rusty the Reseller. And you basically video yourself going into these different places and buying stuff. And it could be all sorts of things. And we're going to, on the what
Right.
in this What Sold podcast, it's the real Matt Brock. And we're going to actually take a
Okay.
look at some of those items and talk about it.
Yes.
Specifically, we're going to choose a couple items each week to talk about, like what sold, why didn't it sell, where do you
Hmm.
find them, stuff like
Hmm.
that. But let's talk about Rusty first. What was the impetus for Rusty?
Well, once I was able to start going out and looking for items in person on a regular basis, weekly, I started to encounter other people doing what I do, and they'd been doing it much longer in some cases than I was doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
I live in Western North Carolina, for those who don't know, and um, there's like any region of the country, if you're there long enough, you start to get a vibe of the locals and the people who have been in this region for a long time. This is their region, the Appalachian people, and this is it's a certain subtype.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the world, the subculture of the reseller world is fascinating to me because of my background being in psychology and counseling. Um, I might view interactions a little differently than the average person, but that is to say, I encountered lots of similarities. And so when I decided to start doing the YouTube channel and it became channels, it was again out of, hey, listen, I'm going to already be doing this stuff. People had told me for a while, maybe you should try a YouTube channel. You can earn revenue off of that. Didn't know a whole lot about it, and thought, well, I'm already doing this work. I don't have to do much extra work in order to record myself doing it. But to be very perfectly honest, I don't know if I've told maybe anybody other than my wife this, but the primary reason, if I'm being totally honest, that I did a character was that I was a little embarrassed that I was doing what I was doing, and I didn't necessarily want people I knew knowing that I was doing this. So
Really?
there is a little bit of a stigma around being a reseller. It's got a term. I think a lot of that has to do with interactions that people at retail stores have with people who are quote unquote resellers
Uh-huh.
when they are pushy or demanding or just simply not kind in their interactions with people. And that has, started to become a thing that it's almost like they look out for you and they're like, oh, I don't know about this guy or this woman. And I definitely sensed that when I started out and kind of like I knew I needed to do it, but I didn't necessarily want to be associated with that culture because I didn't feel like that was me. And so I thought one reason was I don't feel comfortable being myself
Mm.
and maybe just some personal, insecurities. But then secondarily, I thought, what if I created a caricature of sort of the amalgamation of people I'm seeing when I'm out, and I make a name and I become like a backwoods Appalachian guy who's just trying to make a buck. But I try to be kind and try to be helpful and encouraging as well. So that's kind of where it came. It also was kind of fun for me. Um, I don't necessarily have like a big acting background, but I'm certainly, yeah, I have a flair for it a little bit. So it made it interesting for me. I'm not just being myself, putting it all on the table. You can kind of hide behind a facade a little bit. I'm sure that's very characteristic of actors and actresses. There's a comfort in hiding yourself maybe while you're doing it. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting you mentioned that about like sort of the insecurity about being a reseller. I think I am a complete outsider to this world. Like
Yeah,
I've never been a reseller. I never even thought about. I mean, obviously I've sold some stuff on eBay and had a couple of bad experiences. Never want to do it again. So other than Facebook Marketplace and maybe Craigslist, which that's sort of most of us. But then there's
sure.
that segment of people that are in between. When I think about a reseller, I think about the flea market guy who's like, you're like,
Yeah,
what is this that I'm buying here? And most of the time, I think that people like to go to those places because they want to barter and they want to do different things. So
sure.
I think you're probably speaking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but are you speaking a little bit to that character, the kind of the flea market person selling?
I am. Yeah. Yeah, there's a place it's called Smiley's. It's out in the region I live in, and it's like a gigantic outdoor market. And it has a certain reputation. It's like if you can find things out there that you can flip and make money on. You're also going to find a lot of people who all they did was go to Goodwill the day before and buy a bunch of stuff cheap and go out there and tried to sell it for 10 times as much. Also, if something's stolen in the area, the first place the police go to the next day is Smiley's to see if they've got it for sale. You know?
Really?
And that, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, I know multiple times when people were found just hawking things that they had taken. Not to say that's just for whatever reason, sometimes it
That
draws that
makes sense,
crowd.
right?
It's an easy way to get to move something.
Yeah.
So, but I think the thing is there are I don't want to paint such a bad picture about there's a lot of resellers out there who are very honorable, who are very kind in their interactions with people. But then there are people who come in and it's priced $3 and they're like, well, you take 50 cents. And they're like, really, man? It's just $3. And you just why do we have to do this? So that's kind of the stuff I like to stay away from. And I'm sure we'll talk on future episodes about my particular bent towards how I interact with people because I think building relationships, talking with people, not haggling them is actually much more productive than trying to take a $3 sale down to a 50-cent sale one
Right.
time and never come back. Yeah,
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Relationship is everything. Once you build trust with people, they know you're not going to try to rob them or, steal from them. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
no one likes to feel taken advantage of. I call it the mechanic rule. If you find an
Okay.
honest
Oh,
mechanic,
sure.
they have to turn business away because people
It's
want to
loyalty.
trust them. Yeah, and it's also there's a
100%.
level of I don't know enough about this thing. I'm going to trust you as the expert until you screw me, and then I'm never going to go
Right.
back. And if they get a
Yeah. Yeah.
reputation of that, they're in trouble. So if you are going out and you're buying and selling things and you have a reputation of as a sneaky, shady character, people probably
Hmm.
aren't going to deal with you in the same way. So I imagine that's
Yeah,
also part of it.
definitely. For sure it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the impetus for starting the channels. And then once I kind of got a taste for it, that was the same as eBay in the sense that I knew nothing in the beginning, had to learn all of it, not all of it. I had to learn a lot of it myself. I had a friend who lives in another state and city. He is a featured character on there as well at times. And that together we worked on building that first channel. But once we realized how to do it, we discovered some things and that kind of led us to starting some other channels, which is the namesake of this podcast, the
Yeah.
What Sold channel, was sort of refining what we were doing and packaging it in such a way that we could really just give the main details to people who are trying to learn, like I
Yeah.
was in the beginning.
So let's in our last minute or so here, and this is really just an introductory show, just to give
Yeah.
people a sort of a flavor of what we're going to do. But if you were going to
Hmm.
say I imagine when you started, you weren't like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and it may still not be what you're
No.
going to do for the rest of your life. But if you were to say, what is the thing that drives you to continue to do it outside of money? Like everybody does, there's an
Hmm.
economic reason for it, but what is the
Ooh,
reason why
man,
you
that's a
like to
good
do what
question.
you do?
Uh, I mean, money is a big driver. It is
Yeah,
work,
of
right?
course.
But I think the thing that it is exciting because mainly because of the education. So my channels are really sort of taking the things I've learned and sharing them with other people, but I had to learn them first, right? So it's learning. I mean, when I started doing reselling full time, which was in 2020,
Hmm.
I could walk in, for example, to an antique store into a booth that might have things that would fit into hundreds of different categories of items. And I might know about 20 categories. And so I'm looking for things that fall into those categories. The other things I have no experience or knowledge in, so I pass over them. I
Okay, Matt,
likely
Matt,
passed
stop for a
on.
second.
Yes,
Start at
yes.
you squeaked there for a second. Start
Okay.
at start at when you started in 2020. Start there and I'll edit out that part. So hold on. All right.
Yep, yep.
So when you started in 2020, money being the driving force.
Right. So when I started in 2020, I was just trying to make money. But the thing that's really interesting about this work is how much I learn. And the learning is then translated to the YouTube channel. So, for example, if I were to walk in an antique store into a booth, there may be hundreds of different categories of items in that booth. And I might have only known about 20 of them when I got started. But now, 3 years later, I might know about hundreds of different categories of items, enough to be
Wow.
dangerous, to recognize without even having to look them up on my phone. And so I'm ahead there. And every week it's the same thing. I learn about new things every week. And for as many years as I do this, I will still be learning. And that is fascinating to me. It's very interesting. It's still not necessarily going to help me win like um, those games you play, those where you're uh, why can't I think of the name of it?
Trivia?
Trivia games. Yeah, I'm not going to win trivia games necessarily all the time with this knowledge, but it helps me for my work, and it translates to help other people that I know personally too. Sometimes people have things they need to get rid of, or they're in need, and I'm like, oh well, if you just sold this thing, oh, I didn't even know. I was just going to throw that out. I mean, I hear that all the time. I was going to
Yeah.
donate that. I was just going to throw it out. So
Well, it's interesting because you and I are friends off of the show, and I ran into you, and you had found just a little segue story here to kind of maybe sum up that whole thing. Is that you had found a pocket watch,
hmm.
and the person sold it, and you're a buyer, so you're not going to necessarily say, hey, do you realize what you have there? And I'm not trying to paint
Hmm.
this shady picture. You're trying to they were selling this for a lot more than they had purchased it for, but it turns out that watch was worth a whole lot more than what
Yeah.
they thought they were selling it for.
And have I even
So
told you that it's sold? It's
no,
already sold. Yeah. Yeah.
it did
Yeah. You
sell.
don't know this. Oh
No.
yeah. I paid $120 for it and it sold for $900 like two
Wow.
days later.
Oh,
So yeah, it was
yeah.
14 karat. It was solid gold,
Yeah.
and I don't get scores like that all the time, but
And
when
I
you
bet you
do,
those people
feels
bought it
good.
for 10. So in a sense, there's a
Oh
winner
yeah.
all the way
Yeah.
around.
Yes. And I don't, certainly don't want to take advantage of people. And that's why like I don't as a rule, really haggle with people. If they're asking a certain price, if I'm not willing to pay that price, I walk away. If I want that price, if I want it, I'll buy it at that price. And I find that if you do that and you don't mess with people or you don't haggle them, a lot of times other cooler, even better, bigger opportunities come along, and it can be a win-win for everybody involved.
Yeah, and that's kind of a life principle, I think, for some people, for sure. Well,
It
Matt,
is for
we're
me.
we're going to be launching into this show, and we're going to be talking about some very specific items. But we wanted to give an overview of what we're doing. We'll filter in as we go along and talk about as things come along, and maybe you get another watch that you find or whatever.
Great.
But
Oh yeah.
I'm very excited to be doing this with you. I hope those of you that are out there listening to this maybe pick up something, learn something from Matt. That you might sort of apply into your own life if this is an area that you like to spend. And I think that the truth is, this is a fairly universal thing. We all have little items that we want to sell, but most of us are like I don't want to go on Facebook Marketplace because I know I'm going to be dealing with all sorts of craziness. And maybe there are ways you can help us to sort of understand that. So as we move forward, that's what we're going to be doing
Yes.
on this show. That's the stuff that we're going to be talking about. So Matt, thank you so much for the first intro episode we have here. We're gonna be going. We'll be
Yes.
back with a new episode. It'll be posting next week. So we look forward to people being with us. Remember to subscribe to the podcast. Right, it's the What Sold
Yes, please.
podcast. And we'll be in the show notes. We'll be giving links and all sorts of things, and an email. So if you have any specific questions, can't promise Matt's going to be able to answer them all, but at least you can
I
send
will
him a
answer them
message.
all. I'll answer them. They won't be right answers, but
They
I'm
might be
happy to
totally
answer
wrong,
whatever I
but he will
can.
definitely
Yeah,
answer.
exactly.
Anyway, all right. Thanks, Matt. We'll be back with a new episode very soon. Take care, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.